I had this intent in mind where I thought, okay, I'm going to build this video, we're going to publish it, and we're going to drive leads to the business. And it worked immediately.
I've been in the no-code space for over 3 years now, and the tools have changed dramatically since then. Even if you look at my own YouTube channel and some of the older Airtable videos, Airtable is quite a bit different than it is today. When I was first starting, Gareth Pronovost was someone I admired from afar because he had been creating content on YouTube for several years at that point about Airtable. I appreciated his work, and everyone I talked to that knew Gareth always said, quote, he's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. In this conversation with Gareth, I think you'll see a glimpse of that and how knowledgeable he is about no-code tools. Gareth has been working with no-code tools since almost the beginning, and his entire business is built around them. If you'd like to learn more about Gareth after this interview, check out his YouTube channel or his company in the description below. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Gareth Pronovost. Before we get into these no-code tools and what you're doing now, you've had a kind of a cool journey, at least, or a really interesting journey, I would say, about to how you got to where you are. So, right, you studied finance and you thought like that was your backup plan to entrepreneurship innovation. Can you tell me a little bit about was there any, I guess, early influences that made you decide, hey, I'm going to get finance and then I'm going to study entrepreneurship? And, I think your original thought when we were talking, at least when you've mentioned, is like finance was the backup, but like, has your mindset changed about like how you would even approach that even too?
Oh, absolutely. My undergrad was in applied math. So math it always came easy to me, or came easily to me. It just felt like a very safe, stable type of degree to study, right? Everything uses math to some extent. So I thought like, okay, that's my undergrad. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. It wasn't until I started my MBA program that I really knew I loved business. I'd found my passion for that, and I wanted to focus on entrepreneurship. The finance degree kind of happened largely because there was an influence at college. During my MBA program, one of the finance professors was like, you are fantastic at this. You need to study finance, forget entrepreneurship. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I really love entrepreneurship. And yeah, finance comes easy. It's fine, whatever. And he was like, no, seriously, you need to study it. He's like, look, worst case scenario, make it your backup plan in case things don't work out with entrepreneurship, right? I'm like, okay, fine. I'll make it my backup plan. It sounds safe and stable, right? To have a finance degree. Somebody needs a finance degree. Whereas with entrepreneurship, it's like you maybe get lucky, you maybe don't. At least that's how I thought of it in those days. But to the second part of your question, the thing that's changed for me, it was really getting laid off from my finance job. So, I mean, I'd taken a few stabs at entrepreneurship to, muddled success, nothing huge, enough to get by. And then I finally said, you know what, this isn't enough. I'm going to fall back on that backup plan. I'm going to do the thing that I said I was going to do. Go take the stable job, buy the house, have the family, and all those things. And then when I got laid off from that job, it was like, wait, this isn't any safer. This whole idea of like, oh, they're so stable, get a job, follow your backup plan and ignore your dreams. It was just it wasn't any more stable for me anyway. I'm actually super, super grateful that I learned that lesson as quickly and as early as I did. I was amazingly only a couple years into pursuing finance as and my backup plan before I suffered that layoff, and it was just so eye opening, right? I actually have a friend now. I wish I had him in the past, but he says, I would way rather have 5 or 6 clients at any moment in time, because if one of them decides to fire me, I only have to replace 15% of my income. Whereas if you're working for an employer and they decide it's layoff time, you have to scramble to find 100% of your income. It's like, that's madness. And I was like, I've never thought of it that way.
I haven't thought about that way either. So that's something I'm going to pin for later. So I guess in terms of, right, you've learned a lot of lessons, and right, you mentioned, a little bit that while you're in your MBA program, you're trying new ventures, and then, some have failed miserably, all these different things. Have any of those lessons like come into today? Like, is there any, or maybe there's any key lessons, right, that have come into what you're doing today?
This is my experience, and I should never like try to make a blanket statement and say, this is what innovation is going to look like for everybody, but this is what it was like in my experience. Every failure that I had along the way taught me something, right? In terms of what I implement today. One case was one of my very first businesses was reselling stuff on Amazon. I started this program. I started this when I was in my MBA program, and I started buying DVDs and video games at a discount, and waiting for the price to go back up, and then selling them on Amazon. That did pretty well. I mean, enough to keep a roof over my head while going through school and probably working 20 hours a week or so on that business. Um, so that was interesting. I mean, like I said, mixed success, right? What I learned from that was to own your pipeline and to have your own intellectual property. I mean, I had no competitive advantage against, the person next to me who was willing to sell their DVD for $1 less. And so which one are you going to buy, right? I didn't own the pipeline. I had no competitive advantage. It's one of the reasons that it ultimately led me to building my own content, because while, yes, we have a YouTube channel that brings leads to us, it's really the content that we produce that is, it's unique to us, and nobody can really replicate that. I mean, they can create their own content, but they're not going to have our voice and the voice of our brand and the way we represent and all of that. And so it was, like some of these are like mini lessons, like micro lessons where I'm like, I'm never going to make that mistake again. Another one is I'll never sell something for less than, $50 again. It's just not worth it. I had a business where I was, trying to sell, I'm like ashamed to admit this, early days of electronic cigarettes. And I was working on building the liquid that goes in those vape pens just to get a deal. And these things are like $5 a bottle, and to get a deal was just like the same amount of work as selling something for $20,000. So it's like, what in the world? Like, what am I doing? So like mini lessons like that over time, I think you build up like a long list of all these mini lessons, and they make you into the innovator / entrepreneur that you are to become. When I think of timeline, I've got a friend in the Bay Area who's a doctor, and to her, it appears like I had overnight success where she had this, very linearly drawn out map. But I, in fact, think entrepreneurship is very linear as well. You just have to continue trying, right? At least that's what I learned in hindsight.
Yeah, so you mentioned content, right? And you started on YouTube, and I think you're the biggest Airtable, I think, YouTuber from what I can tell. So in terms of like, from posting your first video to, what did you learn, like even learn out of this content journey of like posting on YouTube? And can you just talk about more like what your journey with YouTube has been like, and like
Mm.
why switch? So, you did consulting just for business stuff. Like why switch from like that into these like no code tools, what you're doing today?
So initially, I stumbled into Airtable, and I just put up the first video because I'd always been drawn to video content as a way of demonstrating knowledge. I had this intent in mind where I thought, okay, I'm going to build this video, we're going to publish it, and we're going to drive leads to the business. And it worked immediately. Like immediately saw results, people signing up, wanting, and so it was like, okay, this is now proven. Airtable in those days, gosh, it was so early days. I mean, this is 5.5 years ago now. In those days, you needed other tools to get power from Airtable. Like Airtable's was and still is an incredible database, right, for storing your information. But it had no capacity 5.5 years ago to move data through automation, had no way to talk to other software natively in the tool. So if I wanted to send an email, I had to integrate with something else. And in those days, for me, that was Zapier. So then I had to learn Zapier. Um, and then it's so crazy to think about, just how much this industry has evolved over the last 5.5 years. But Airtable didn't have interfaces in those days either, which is another component which basically dictates how people interact with your database. So in early days for Airtable, if you wanted to share your database, you wanted to give somebody access, you gave them access to all of it, which is crazy to think of, because if you have like private information in there and you need somebody to facilitate this little part of a process, they get the keys to the kingdom, and they can see everything, which is crazy. So then you had other software tools coming out. Stacker was the first one that I remember being on the scene. Then Softer came out, No Loco. These are interface tools that said, hey, you can actually police what people see inside your database and present it in the way that you want them to see, and you can control what they can edit, and it's going to interact with Airtable. So then I had to learn those tools, right? And so in a way, the industry, I was just along for the ride, man. I mean, I wasn't not some great thinker who brainstormed all this innovation himself. I was just like, hey, this is what we need next. Oh, look, there's a tool that's offering it. I'm going to go learn the thing, right? It all started with one domino, and the rest of it just kind of was dictated. In a way, it was like it just presented itself to me, and I just followed the industry trends. Now, in today's world, all these other tools, or tools like Airtable, I should say, are expanding into all three of these opportunities. So Airtable has its own automations, its own interfaces, but these other tools have done the same thing where they say, oh, well, you can store data in us too. And so as we've watched no code as an industry evolve, these tools still play together, but they're also saying, hey, you can kind of use us by ourselves if you want as well. And ultimately, people need to learn about all these tools. Well, I shouldn't say they need to, but there is interest in our community. As we've talked about these tools over and over, through the years, people want to learn about Softer. People start following us now because, hey, you can integrate Softer with Google Sheets, for example. It's allowed us to expand our reach. And I think ultimately it serves everyone in the no code space, because at the end of the day, I don't care what tool you use. I just want you to build cool stuff. Like, I want to help you get there, right? And so if you're in a spreadsheet in the cloud, cool. Like, I think there are better tools out there, but if that's where you're at, I'm gonna meet you where you're at.
Okay, timeout. I wanted to just let you know that if you're looking to start your own venture, we have a free course at Station all about it. It'll help you get your foundation right with your own venture, especially if you're looking to be a bootstrapped venture. Again, it's completely free. Check it out in the description of this episode. Short timeout over, back to the interview. There are plenty of opportunities. Like, it's changed so much. Even I've been working with Airtable and different tools for about 2 years now. It's a drastic difference. You see, like, all these different tools have look way different than even when I started 2 years ago. And there's just so much moving pieces, and some of them are starting to look a little similar. Maybe they all have unique things, and definitely there's more and more like horsepower to these tools too, right? You can do so much more with them. So, and building cool things, that's the fun part in all this. So with that, you've kind of mentioned hey, that things just kind of rolling into things, but what do you see as the biggest opportunities in these no code tools?
This is an interesting one for me, and I'm kind of torn here because I mentioned the way I like to describe it, and I touched on this in the last little question I answered, but let me expand a little bit. There are three core components to all no code solutions. Where your data lives is number one. How your data moves, automation, is number two. And how people interact with your data, interfaces, is number three. These three components are in practically every solution that you'll imagine. People need access to certain stuff, that's interfaces. When certain things happen, other things need to, progress, and that's automation. And then, of course, your data has to live somewhere, right? It doesn't matter which of the tools you're using. You can build an awesome solution depending on what your needs are. Maybe this software offers one thing that the other one doesn't, as you pointed out. But the opportunity that I see, the way that I see the industry expanding right now, is everybody is going broad. Everyone's going horizontal. They want to be in all three of those camps. And I understand why. From a strategic perspective, they want this because it allows enterprise clients to sign up, right? When you go and you capture a Fortune 100 company as a client who has 3,000 people that they need to sign up, and they're going to spend $50 a person, that's a big ticket, item that these software companies want to capture. But then if you tell them, okay, so, I've got the best database on the planet, but you're going to need to integrate with Zapier, then these enterprise clients say, well, look, it's a whole other process to get our team signed up with Zapier, and we don't want to do that. And so now you're at risk of losing the sale. So this is why you see this expansion broad, going broad. But from the small to medium business, that's not the case, right? Like as a small business owner myself, I don't care, man. I want the best tool for the job at the best price for the tool, right? So if Make is better than Zapier and cheaper, I'm all in, right? And I have no allegiance to Zapier. It's not hard for me to adopt a new software. There's not a rigorous process that my company goes through to decide if we're going to use Make. It's basically like, what does Gareth say we're going to use? So that is we're watching these software giants like the Airtables capture that enterprise client, but it's the small medium businesses that I think are going to stop using Airtables and maybe start looking for other alternatives that go deep in one of those three buckets. If there's the opportunity for a database to really do like powerful stuff that, maybe Airtable doesn't offer, that database is going to win in the small, medium business segment. And so that's while look in business strategy, whenever you make a choice, you make a decision, you are going in a direction, understanding that you're going to lose some other, opportunities along the way. Right. And that's what we're seeing. So when Airtable zigs this direction, they're the, 1,000-pound gorilla in the room. There's an opportunity for other companies to zag over here.
It's definitely interesting to see them all go after enterprise customers, like Airtable and the Notions to really start to push towards that, which makes sense, right? You
Right.
mentioned the contracts are much bigger. There's probably more consistency because once they're in your system, like the churn is super low.
Right.
That all makes a ton of sense. So I guess for someone who might be coming into this space and whatnot, I think one of the things that you mentioned in a different conversation was, right, I'm not, or even in this conversation, you mentioned, hey, I'm not going to price anything underneath $50. And in a different conversation, you mentioned, hey, I want a conversion rate to be 30%. So do you want to maybe explain a little bit about that? Because I think maybe as like a first time entrepreneur or first time innovator, it's easy to be like, oh, but people will buy that first with a cheaper
Mm.
price. So can you want to explain maybe just more about like how you think about that particularly?
Well, okay, yeah. Specifically, I want to maybe go back and rewind about that conversion rate. That had to do with high ticket offerings that we were talking about in a different conversation. If somebody's interested in consulting services, first they filled out a form on our site and said, hey, I'm interested in having a conversation. Then they have an intro call where we talk about their specific needs, we talk about their budget, etc. If there's a fit, then we'll, make say, hey, this is how we can work together for next steps. In the early days of my business, I was priced way too low on those high ticket conversions, rather high ticket consulting packages. And when I say high ticket, in those days, it wasn't so high ticket. When I started, I had no idea how to price this stuff. Like I mean, I thought I'd done my research, but you make mistakes along the way. You have to learn and evolve. So I started at it was like $1,500. I think I had a consulting offer for $1,500. It's insane to say it these days. Like a project, it's like a week worth of working with us, and it's like most of our projects are 6-week minimum. Like so, like for 1,500. Anyway, it's where we were at the time. We had to learn. So in those days, it was like I was trying to make like a package. It was like, hey, if you want to work with us, I'll build this project for you. Sight, almost like sight unseen. Like I don't know how complicated it is, but I'll commit for a fixed price point. Did not work. Do not recommend. Like I said, you have to make mistakes along the way and evolve. That very first, bit of video I did, and I got four inquiries off of the first week of putting out that video, and 3 of them converted. And that was, I mean, a 75% conversion rate is way too high, frankly. And that was an indication to me that I was way underpriced. Because if that many people are buying, it's like, ooh, that's, So I aim for like a 25 to 30%. I was taught that setting your price should be like tightening a screw. You don't want it to spin without any friction, right? If there should be some friction when you're tightening a screw to know that you're actually catching. If everybody is able to buy it, then you're probably underpriced, right? That being said, conversion rates are different in every part of our business because we sell digital products as well. So if we have a, digital course, $50 might be the right price for that, or, depending on the amount of content. We have another course currently sells for $1,500. It's a much more robust offering. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of things you can do in terms of experimenting with price points, and depends on what your offer is, and uh, conversion rates in an email, for like digital products are supposed to be like 4%, right? So much different from a sales call where you're meeting with a client for a high ticket offer who's already gone through the process of filling stuff out. So I just want to be clear that, gosh, if I converted 30% of my courses, I'd have retired already.
Yeah, I should have clarified that. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Where I think my head was going, I think there's a lot of comparisons between like what you're thinking about, like, hey, I want these high conversion rate for, especially for consulting. And then I think, right, Notion, Airtable, the ones that are going for enterprise, right? They're looking for a similar, if not higher conversion rate when they start doing sales calls, right? Because
Right.
these big tickets, like that's what they're selling. So like it's not the, and just spray and play. It's like, hey, we're going to be really intentional about what we're doing, and
Yeah.
trying to get these like really great customers, but also really high ticket items for sure.
I'm torn because I think from Airtable's perspective, I totally get what they're doing, and obviously they have a lot of VC funding behind them that they got at a bad time. In hindsight, I mean, I think 2021 was their last round. I think their company value was stated around 6 or 7 billion at the time. Um, and this was at the height of the market, which we saw tech crash pretty significantly at the end of 2021. Um, so I'm sure they raised a lot of money at a very high valuation that people are, upset about, and they are probably really under, a lot of pressure right now to drive revenue. And I'm grateful that I don't have those same issues, because we're entirely self-funded as a company, and so it means I get to make decisions in a from a different perspective. Let's just say.
There was probably a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down to like being VC backed, not VC backed, but we'll pin that one. So I guess in
Right.
terms of like what you're thinking about right now, like, is there anything that you're like, hey, this is my sole focus, or like, what are like the priorities and things that are exciting you right now?
Honestly, for me, watching no code at this point, the position we're at right now in the industry, in the no code space, is we're teetering on mass adoption. Like, we got through like 5.5 years ago when I started my channel, it was just the crazy geeks like me who cared about this stuff, right? In fact, some of the original people who were in my original course, um, they've all gone on to build their own consulting firms by now. Like, they're like super into this stuff. What we're seeing now is people in this space, like everybody, just starting to pick up no code tools, whether it's Zapier for automation, or Airtable for data storage, and now automation and all the other pieces. But people are starting to realize I can build my own software using no code tools, and I don't have to have a computer science degree in order to do this. And it's fun. The majority of the people who are using the tools, though, are not the builders themselves. It's the person who gets hired into the office, and they need to access an interface, and that's it. Like, they have a little like portal they log into. They don't even know what the heck the tool is on the back end, and they're just, clicking around and doing their job. So I think it's a fun space. It's a fun place to be in the industry as we see this kind of, adoption take off. I'm really passionate about what automation makes available. If I told you how many hours a week I work, you probably wouldn't believe me. It's not very many. Uh, and I think that most people can be in a place where they're incredibly productive if they've built these systems on the back end to do all the work for them. The majority of work is copying and pasting nonsensical data from one place to the next, putting it in a different format, and shipping it out. And all of that's so automatable, right? So when you learn how to automate that, the productivity skyrockets. And I think we're just at the beginning of people realizing that. And gosh, you open up AI, which is a whole other rabbit hole that we can go down. You add AI to the mix, and work is going to change in the next 10 to 20 years, almost as dramatically, if not more, than the Industrial Revolution. I wouldn't be surprised.
This is a good transition because I think I know we're going to go with this one. So I guess, when you're done with this, right, you're really thinking really forward ahead at more than most, I would say, especially when it comes to no code tools. So when you're done with this work, like, what do you hope that you've accomplished with it? What do you hope that's like, hey, here's the thing that I was a part of, kind of thing?
I would love to be known as one of the key players who helped educate the workforce in how to think about no code tools, how to not just think about the tools, but how to implement them in a way that increases your productivity. And so to that end, I hope, and I don't know, I get some pushback from some entrepreneurs and innovators on this, but I don't feel like the 40-hour work week works for me, man. And I sure as heck don't think it works for most people. Um, there are some people I know who really love to work, right? But I'm not one of them. I like working, but it's not all I like to do. And so I'm hopeful that at the end of this adoption, that we can redefine work. I mean, look, we already saw it in 2020 when all of a sudden we were all forced to work from home. And everyone was like, oh, the economy's going to collapse. And then it's like, oh, wait, we actually got more done. Interesting, right? And that's debatable, right? And I don't want to get in that whole like, okay, fine. But what we have seen is that there are jobs that people can do remotely and they get done. And largely this is driven by process improvements and automation. And we saw a huge uptick in our demands for services in 2020 and afterwards because of the fact that more teams are running remotely now and systems are relied upon even more so than before. So having that system in place, having those automations in place, I'm hopeful that by the end of this, man, people are redefining what the work week looks like. Whether that's I work 4 days a week and that's normal now, or a 30 hours is considered full time, 30 hours a week in the future. I'm hopeful that that's very possible because without going like too deeply into this, I think that the 40-hour work week was devised when your job was to sit here in a chair and turn a crank. And that's not the end of the world, right? Like, okay, I can do that for 8 hours. But in the knowledge economy that we're in today, like you have to be you have to be processing at a high level. And to really ask someone to do that for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, in my experience, most people don't function at that level for that amount of time without letting stuff drop. So maybe, fingers crossed, all of this automation can mean that people get to work less.
I'm hopeful too. I think it'll give people more of the time to do the stuff they want to do rather than, oh, I have to do, like you said, move data or do this. And right, moving data is even email, right? Email is just doing that, which is mundane, but it sucks energy out really quickly. So I'm encouraged by it all too. So with all of that, right, where can people learn more about what you're doing?
Swing by Gap Consulting. That's GAP Consulting .io. We are always trying to be innovative in the way that we are thinking about teaching no code tools. Also, check out YouTube. Just do a search for Gap Consulting. You'll be able to find us and learn more about all this stuff.
Personally, I love most of Gareth's approaches to his work. The main exception being that I really do love to work. Anyways, if you think Gareth is great, leave a comment or sign up for the station newsletter in the description and let me know what you thought of the episode there. Thanks for watching and listening.